History books told us vampires never existed. But what if I told you? Governments, priests, and villagers all once agreed on one terrifying truth. The dead were hunting the living. The people of Pien, Poland, weren't afraid of dying. They were afraid of what came after. And their graves still carry the scars of that terror. Every grave whispered the same chilling message. Do not let them rise again. Imagine walking through this meadow today. The grass sways. The air is still. But just a few feet beneath your shoes lies something out of a nightmare. Skulls with sickles pressed against their throats. Bodies weighted down by heavy stones. Ash scattered like a final warning. This wasn't just burial. This was containment. The people who laid these corpses to rest didn't believe they were ordinary dead. They believed they were something else. The year is 2015. Polish archaeologists are quietly surveying rural land when they stumble upon a burial ground unlike anything they've ever seen. At first, they think it's just another old cemetery. But then they uncover the first skeleton. The body's spine is broken. A sickle blade lies across its throat. Nearby, the earth is thick with charcoal, as if the grave itself was burned to purify it. As they dig further, the story grows darker. More skeletons, more iron blades pinning them to the soil, stones jammed into mouths, hands bound. Each body tells the same story. These people weren't laid to rest. They were chained into the earth. The villagers of centuries past didn't just write this story in ink. They wrote it in fear. A fear that one day, these bodies might climb back out. Why? Because this wasn't just a field. It was what would come to be known as the field of vampires. Long before Hollywood gave us pale men in castles, before Dracula cast his shadow, the fear of the vampire lived in the soil of Eastern Europe. But it didn't look the way you imagine. It wasn't capes, bats, or castles. It was neighbors. The man who died suddenly from plague. The woman who whispered curses on her deathbed. The child whose body refused to decay like the others. To the people of Pien, these weren't accidents. They were warnings. Signs that death hadn't finished its work. Signs that the body might still walk. And so they buried their dead with weapons. Not to protect them, but to protect themselves. A sickle across the neck, so if the corpse rose, it would cut off its own head. A stone jammed into the mouth, so it couldn't bite. Heavy rocks across the chest, to pin the body down forever. Each burial was a desperate act of war, against something unseen, yet deeply believed. Here's the part that still makes historians shiver. The field of vampires wasn't random superstition. It was systematic. Every grave, carefully arranged, every ritual, consistent, as if the villagers of Pien knew something worth fearing, generation after generation. And yet, no records, no explanation, only bones, blades, and silence. The question remains, what happened here? Why did this village, more than most, go to such extremes? Some say it was plague. When death spread fast, people needed answers and scapegoats. The restless dead became an explanation for illness. Dig up a grave, find it strangely intact, and convince yourself the corpse had been feeding on the living. But others whispered darker theories. What if the people of Pien weren't imagining it? What if they saw something in the night? something they couldn't explain. Picture it. A villager wakes to find livestock dead, blood drained. Another swears they saw a pale figure lingering by the window. The dead are blamed, and fear takes root. Soon, suspicion spreads like fire. A mother blames her dead child. A husband blames his deceased wife. The line between grief and paranoia disappears. And in this frenzy of fear, the field of vampires is born. But here's the twist that unsettles archaeologists most. In PN, the vampire graves didn't belong to strangers. They belonged to the community, people who were once trusted, loved, remembered. What does it mean when an entire village turns against its own dead? When even memory can't protect you from being staked into the ground? And the mystery only grows deeper. Because PN is not alone. Across Eastern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered burial sites with the same grim markers. Iron spikes, mutilated skeletons, graves burned to ash. Each discovery widens the same chilling question. Were these people terrified of superstition? Or were they fighting something real? The deeper you dig, the darker it gets. Because these anti-vampire burials weren't rare, they were everywhere. Which means one of two things. Either mass hysteria gripped villages for centuries, or something unexplainable really was walking the earth. The soil is silent now, but the graves are not waiting. You think the story ends in the soil of PN, but it doesn't. Because the same signs, the same rituals, keep appearing across Europe. Almost as if villages, separated by mountains and rivers, shared one language, a language of fear. In Bulgaria, skeletons were found with iron rods hammered through their chests. In Romania, corpses were dug up, their hearts removed and burned. In Slovakia, villagers left the dead unburied, believing Earth itself could not contain them. And every single case carried the same silent verdict. These were not ordinary humans. But here's the haunting question. If it was just folklore, why did so many cultures agree on the same methods to stop them? Historians try to explain it away. They say it was disease, tuberculosis, cholera, plague. People wasted away, coughing blood, growing pale, losing weight. To the living, it must have looked like something was feeding on them, and so the dead were blamed. Simple, right? Science solving superstition. Case closed. Or is it? Because when archaeologists in PN tested some of the skeletons, they found no sign of plague, no disease in the bones, nothing to suggest illness. So if it wasn't sickness, what was it? Why bury your dead with a blade to the throat if there was no plague to fear? Some researchers believe these vampire burials were punishment reserved for outcasts, criminals, those who defied the church. But here's the catch. Many of the bodies weren't outsiders. They were ordinary villagers, respected in life, mutilated in death. So again, the question sharpens. What did these people do to deserve such terror? Imagine it. You live in a small village. Everyone knows you. You share bread, labor, stories by firelight. And then you die. But instead of being mourned, your body is desecrated. Your neighbors cut your tendons, press iron across your throat, drive a stake through your ribs. It wasn't cruelty. It was desperation. A desperate attempt to keep you from returning. Returning as what? Folklore whispers that vampires were not strangers. but transformed loved ones. A mother who returned to cradle her child until it suffocated. A husband who slipped into his wife's bed and drained her life while she slept. Children who lured their friends into the woods and were never seen again. And if even half of these whispers were true, then the field of vampires wasn't a cemetery. It was a battlefield. But the strangest discovery comes not from the Middle Ages, but from modern times. In 2006, archaeologists in Venice uncovered a skull with a brick jammed into its mouth. The Vampire of Venice, they called it. Her jaw forced open, teeth broken, silenced forever. Why? Because locals believed the dead sometimes chewed through their burial shrouds, and then kept chewing until they gnawed their way out. The brick was the only way to make her stop. Think about that. People believed the dead could keep moving, keep feeding, even underground. And when they buried them, they weren't saying goodbye. They were locking the coffin like a prison, which leaves one chilling thought. Prisons are built for the guilty. So what crime did these corpses commit? Here's where PN resurfaces in our story. Because when the field of vampires was excavated, some skeletons showed violent injuries before burial. Slashed ribs, broken jaws, as if the villagers had fought them while they were still alive. Could it be that some of these vampires weren't dead at all when they were buried? And if so, were they criminals? Or were they something else entirely? Science wants to tame this story. Historians want to close the book, but the graves won't let them. Every time a site is uncovered, the same symbols return. Iron, ash, stones. The same fear, repeating like an echo across centuries. But echoes are born from sound. So what sound? What scream started this one? Let's step back. Imagine you're in the 1600s. Your village has no electricity. The nights are darker than anything we know today. And one evening, a neighbor's child falls sick. The next morning, another child is pale, weak. Then another. It feels as if something invisible is moving through the village. And then, someone swears they saw a figure standing at the edge of the meadow. Tall, silent, watching. By the late 18th century, whispers of vampire graves weren't just rural gossip anymore. They became official. Priests recorded unnatural corpses in their parish logs. Scholars argued over whether disease or the supernatural explained the terror. And yet, no record ever explained why certain graves, like those here in Pienne, looked more like battlegrounds than burials. Bodies pinned with sickles, skulls weighed down with stones, limbs twisted, jaws broken, as if the dead themselves had been chained in place. But who ordered this? A panicked village? A priest enforcing ritual? Or something far stranger? An entire community convinced that death was not the end. Modern science tried to silence the story. Archaeologists explained it as fear of plague, a way for villagers to keep disease carriers from spreading after death. But here's the question no one has ever answered. You tell yourself it's imagination, but when you bury the child, you don't just bury them. You bind them. You cut them. You weigh them down. Because if there's even a chance, just a chance, they might come back, you cannot risk it. And that's how fear became ritual. Ritual became culture. And culture became legend. The legend of the vampire. But wait, what if the villagers weren't wrong? What if their terror was not hysteria, but memory? Memory of something they really saw. Something they couldn't explain. Something that forced them to invent brutal methods of defense. Because here's the part no one talks about. The vampire myth isn't isolated to Europe. In China, folklore speaks of the Jiangshi, the hopping vampire that drains life. In Africa, tales tell of the Asasabonsum, a creature with iron teeth and hooks for feet. In the Americas, whispers of the chupacabra mirror the same hunger for blood. Different continents, different cultures, same fear. How? Why? Unless these weren't myths spreading. They were encounters repeating. And that returns us to Pienne, to the quiet field with its iron-bound graves. What exactly did they see here? What truth did they bury? Blade by blade, stone by stone? Because centuries later, even science admits one thing: we still don't know. But here's the question no one has ever answered. If these were just plague burials, why are they scattered across fields all over Europe, sometimes centuries apart, with the same mutilations repeated like a secret code? What if it wasn't plague? What if people weren't terrified of germs, but of something they had seen with their own eyes? Strange figures walking at night. Fresh footprints in cemetery soil. Unexplained deaths. Weeks after a funeral. Legends say entire families in Pienne locked their doors, not against thieves, but against their own dead. So the field remains, a scar in the earth, silent, watching. Some locals still avoid walking across it after dark. They say the ground feels too soft, as if something beneath is waiting. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that vampires were real, but that entire generations believed they were. So deeply. They changed the way they buried their dead. So deeply that the scars still remain in the soil. Today, the field of vampires is quiet. But if history teaches us anything, it's that myths never die. They only wait for someone to dig them up again. And if you thought a single field of graves was terrifying, what about entire towns? Real towns that once thrived in America, appearing in deeds, newspapers, even family photos, yet on modern Google Maps, they've vanished, blurred, blacked out. That's our next story.